Hello, everybody. I hope you can all hear me, and welcome to this webinar, Postgraduate Study in History at UL. It's a great pleasure to be with you this afternoon. I'm not going to spend too long, but my name is David Fleming. I'm the head of department, and I'm joined by Dr. Niamh McGowan and Dr. Aaron Donaghy, who you will be meeting very shortly, and I will be introducing them later on. But this is an opportunity for you to get some idea of what we offer in terms of postgraduate study in the history department, and hopefully to excite you in the further study of history. So I hope you can see the slides. That's what we're going to be doing today. After me, I'm going to introduce Niamh McGowan, who's the course director for the MA History. And after that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Aaron Donaghy, who will speak about the new MA in Irish and Global Conflict History. And then there will be an opportunity to ask some questions. So before I go into any detail about the programs, I want you to be able to meet our experts, our historians, who are here, who will be engaging with you on further study if you decide to join us. And I'm not going to go into any detail on Aaron nor Niamh, because they themselves will introduce their research. But just to give you a flavour, I thought I might introduce the others. Richard Kerben is a historian of early modern Germany and is interested in looking at scholarship and converts and religion in the German universities. He's on a research award, busily working away on a particular project at the moment. Ciara Brannock is a modern historian of Ireland, interested in the 19th and 20th century. She's particularly interested in medical history, social history, and again is just finishing a big research project looking at coroners, death, and engagement with the state at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. I myself am an early modern historian of Ireland. I'm interested in all sorts of things, but mostly political matters, but I verge into all sorts of other areas as well. 18th century Ireland is my cup of tea. Alistair's cup of tea, Alistair Malcolm, is interested in early modern Spain, and particularly in the role of elites and political elites, and the Kingdom of Spain and its overseas possessions in New Spain or Mexico, and the other parts of the Spanish Empire as well. Rowan O'Donnell is an expert on the Irish Troubles and Irish republicanism. He's going to be involved with Aaron in the new MA in Irish and Global Conflict History, looking at the particular history of the Irish Troubles. Carol Mullaney Dignam is a historian of Ireland, of the mostly 19th century, but strays into the 18th and strays into the 20th, but predominantly 19th, very much interested in the big house and gentry studies, house studies, and particularly music in those houses, but interested in all sorts of other aspects of that history of Ireland as well. And Rachel Murphy is also a historian of Ireland, mostly the 19th century. She is teaching on the MA in History of Family, and her own interests verge in that area, but also in the area of estates and estate mapping in particular. Amongst other things, I've just given you a very brief summary. They're interested in all sorts of things, which I hope you get a sense of the diversity of the people that we have in the department. I'm going to move on, and I'm going to, well, that's just giving people big heads in the Department of History postgraduate programs. This is what we have on offer. We have our MA in History, which Niamh will introduce now in a second. We have an MA in the History of Family, which, as the title suggests, looks at the family in a historical context, not genealogy, but the social history of the family. It could be inheritance, it could be marriage patterns, it could be aspects dealing with family strategy in the past, in all periods across many different places. We also have an MA in Public History and Cultural Heritage, which is designed with people who may want to go into the public history world, the museum world, the library world, the exhibition world. It's how history is communicated, for want of a better term. How history is communicated is discussed today. So it's quite contemporary. It's bridging contemporary life and our current preoccupations with the past, and how the past informs the present and how it's presented. I myself am the course director for the MA in Local History. The MA in Local History is a part-time program taken in the evening. It's delivered across 2 years, and I don't think I need to explain too much about what local history is. It's the local history of any place. It's not the local history of Limerick or Clare or Kerry. It can be the local history of any aspect of any part of Ireland. And Aaron will be talking about the new MA in Irish and Global Conflict History, so I won't say anything about that. You can get lots more information on any of these by clicking on the link here, and these links, these slides will be sent to you for further information at the end of this webinar. But there's a great deal more information, particularly about the content. Of course, you can ask us at the end about any particular aspect you might be interested in. And to apply for any of these programs, the link is here. It's through the university's Graduate and Professional Studies website, GPS, and you can apply for any of those programs, except MA Local History. MA Local History recruits every 2 years, and so the next time we'll be recruiting is September 2024. But let's say you are interested in a particular program at this stage and you want to make contact with the course director for that particular course. Well, here is the specific email addresses for my colleagues. Niamh there at the top for MA History, Ciara Brannock or Rachel A. Murphy for MA History of the Family, Carol Mullaney Dignam for MA Public History and Cultural Heritage, myself for Local History, and Aaron Donaghy or Ruan O'Donnell for the MA in Global and Irish Conflict History. And again, more information about the application process is contained on the Graduate and Professional Studies website. Very hard to see that, but it is www.ul.ie/how-apply. So just copy and paste that or Google it and you'll get there. So really, that's all I'm going to say. Before I hand it over to Niamh, what I hope that you will join us. We are a fairly vibrant academic community of scholars in UL. We have, for example, this evening, there's a seminar on the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which as MA students, you would be invited to attend. There's all sorts of other things happening in the department as well, which I don't, unfortunately, have time to delve, except to say that we're a fairly energetic, fairly happy group of people, and we will look forward to meeting you if you choose to join us in one of our programs. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and I will pass it over to my colleague Niamh McGowan.
Hi everyone, thanks very much for that. David, you're all really welcome. I'm just going to take a moment to share my slides, which hopefully I will be able to do without too much trouble. So just give me 1 second while I upload these. And if anyone has any questions at any stage, just while these are opening, you can pop them in the chat and we're more than happy to answer them. Okay.
Yeah, we can see it now, Niamh, yeah.
You can see that? Okay, that's great. I'm just going to see if I can change the presenter format. It's okay, I'll just work away with this. So if everyone can see that, that's great. I'll kick off. So as David said, my name is Niamh McGowan and I am the course director for the MA History. My own research, just as David has introduced the others, I'm an art and architectural historian and I primarily work on Irish architectural history and heritage. So if anybody wants to chat about that, do let me know and get in touch. Okay, so I'm going to kick on through my slides. So the MA History at UL, it is designed very much to allow students to continue to develop advanced skills in research and writing. So if you are somebody who, has come to perhaps your 4th year and in your history degree at UL or at another institution, and you really feel that you have more to do, that there's more that you want to do, that you're engaged, that you're interested, that you don't want to stop, this is really a perfect program for you, because it really allows you to continue to develop your individual research interests through your thesis, but also through the modules that are on offer. And the program is balanced between taught modules, which are focused on building your research skills for your thesis, and the thesis itself. So there's kind of 3 components: the taught modules, the modules which are focused on building your research skills, and then that thesis. So that's very much the tripartite structure of the program as you move through it. So students are very much supported in developing their insight into key thematic areas through the modules, and also in developing their skills and their confidence in research communication and presentation. And there's a real emphasis on collaboration across the MA programs, and I think that's a real strength of the department and of the way that the MA programs work together. David mentioned that we're quite a vibrant department, and I think that is true. And the students very much get to work with, so if you're on the MA History, for instance, you'll be working and meeting the students from the other MA programs as well. And I think that's a great benefit in lots of ways, in terms of just your enjoyment of the program, but also the different kinds of research that you come across as you work with your colleagues across the programs. And also as you engage with them on field trips, on archival visits, for instance, sharing insight into different sources and primary sources and methods and approaches. And you'll also be working very closely with your supervisor on your individual project, and you'll be collaborating with your supervisor as you develop your thesis. So I'll just move on to my next slide. So I'm going to just go through the program content, and I would urge anyone to get in touch if they have any questions about the module content in more detail. But you can also go on to the UL Book of Modules and look up any of those if you're interested in finding out any more detail about them. So in the first semester, which is the autumn semester, that tends to run from September through to the end of November. You will have 2 core modules and 2 optional modules. So the core modules that you'll be doing, the first one is concepts and methods. And that's very much, I suppose, developing your skill set as a historian in terms of historical research practices, methodologies, theories, and approaches. And my colleague, Dr. Aaron Donoghue, who's on the call, is currently leading that module. The second core module is historical research in practice, and that involves essentially engaging and participating in the research seminars that are ongoing in the department. It's a really great way of actually building your network in terms of your work as a historian, but also learning from other professional researchers, how they're carrying out their research and the type of contemporary work that's been carried out at the cutting edge of different fields of research. And there is one this afternoon, as David mentioned earlier. Then you have options. So you choose 2 options, and these are subject to availability. So for instance, the modules that ran in our most recent intake of the programme were Art and Power in the Age of the Tudors and Stuarts with Dr. Alistair Malcolm, and I know that's a hugely popular one for students, and they really get a huge amount from that. The Graduate Seminar in Irish Cultural History, I lead myself, and I certainly enjoy teaching it, and it's taught across the 3 MA programmes, and I like to think we have a good time when we engage with it. There's Linking Families to Communities, which is part of the MA History of Family, which you can take. The other 2 modules will run again, but they're subject to confirmation. So that's University and Society in Medieval and Early Modern Europe and the Evolution of the Irish Town. And you also have an optional module, just in case that isn't enough to be getting on with, to take Beginner's Ecclesiastical Latin. So that's an option. And if you are someone who's particularly interested, for instance, in early modern history, late medieval history, or ecclesiastical history, that's a really useful one to take as an extra skill set. Okay, so my next slide. So moving then on to the spring program content. So you have 3 core modules in spring: the history research seminar, which involves presenting your research project as it's in progress to your colleagues, getting feedback and also giving feedback to your colleagues on theirs. And that's a really valuable module. It also encourages you to, it's very much a building block in terms of developing your thesis project, working on your research plan, on identifying your primary sources, nuancing your research question, etc. Then there's historical research and practice 2. So that's essentially that engaging in those seminars that are ongoing in the second semester. And then there's a third module, which is directed reading and history. And that's where you are working very closely with your dissertation supervisor to start building out your secondary literature and that ground floor of your thesis project. You then have an option to choose one of the below modules. So you can choose from the Long War in Ireland, 1968 to 98, which is led by Dr. Ruan O'Donnell. The public history internship, which is coordinated between myself and Dr. Carol Malani Dignam, and that's very much designed in collaboration with the individual student in terms of what their particular needs and interests are and where they are, for instance, in terms of that internship. And that can be incredibly valuable in terms of developing your network and your professional skills and your next step in many ways. So students have found that really, really valuable. And then you can also choose people on the move studying migration, which again is part of the MA History of the Family. So you have your 3 core modules and you have your optional module for your second semester in the spring. Okay, moving on to my next slide then. Developing your thesis. So students sometimes want to get a sense of what is working on the MA thesis like. When do you start to develop your work with your supervisor, etc. So you begin discussing your potential thesis subject with your program director about midway through semester 1. So kind of around maybe the end of October, you'll start having a chat over a cup of coffee with the program director about the type of thing that you're interested in doing. Now, some students will bring a very strong idea of what they want to work on, and others don't. Others are kind of coming to the program with general interests, and they don't have a set idea of what they want to do their thesis on. And either approach is absolutely fine. So you don't have to have, a set idea of what you want to work on for your thesis coming into the program. And, I might argue that it's better to kind of come with an open mind and engage with the modules and see what takes your fancy. And it's very much the job of the program director, which would be myself or the other program directors, to help you work through your interests and your experience and to find a suitable topic that will interest you and engage you and keep you going through the long nights where you're working away on that project, and also where you can make an original contribution. So you co-design that in that early stage. And then by the end of semester 1, you'll be matched with a supervisor. You'll meet with them regularly throughout the second semester to develop your secondary reading, to identify your primary sources, and to work on your research question and your research plan. So that's very much, you're working with them by the end of semester 1, then you're kind of really building up your work throughout the second semester and starting your primary source engagement and writing up your research. You also then work with there's a typo then, you will also work with the broader MA research community in the research presentation module. So you'll be giving a presentation on your work in progress as well as giving feedback to others. And then you'll give a first draft, I suppose, just to give you a sense of that, around mid-June to your supervisor, a final draft for feedback around the middle of July, and then the final submission of the thesis would be the middle of August. So that's just giving you a sense of that. Okay. So what do our students tell us about what we do? So we've gotten feedback that you get excellent individual support from staff in the department. It's, one of the benefits of having a small and vibrant department is that, we work closely together. And I think that's actually a real benefit for an MA history program. We have flexible learning options as well. So there's a blend of online and in-person learning options. There's good building blocks through the program modules. So this is feedback that we've gotten from students that you're not just kind of thrown in at the deep end and told to write a thesis. All of those different modules throughout the first and the second semester really help to develop those building blocks. They develop your skills and your confidence in working on the thesis, moving through those modules. Students love the field trips and the opportunities for engaging with students across the other programs, and they see that as a positive. And they've also given us feedback that the internship is a great way of developing contacts and professional experience if you choose to do that. Here's just a few more notes from our student testimonials. So we didn't ask them for, we didn't bribe them or anything like that to get these testimonials, but you can see here the types of feedback that we get, you know, focusing on things like debate and discussion, the teaching staff being approachable and supportive, lots of individual attention and feedback. And you can see here the students saying, you know, which modules really worked well for them, the concepts and methods course, leading them to consider archivists and archivistics, and then building on that with the internship module in the UL Special Collections Library, and then moving on to actually become a professional archivist. And then Dr. Stephen Griffin, you know, also noting that the supportive nature of the staff in the department, encouraging you to keep interest in lots of different historical subjects, which allows you to identify the historical problem which forms the crux of your MA dissertation. So there's a couple of other student testimonials there if you'd like to look at them in the on the programme website. So just in terms of that balance then, and just kind of practicalities in terms of the balance between working online and on campus, there's a mix of online and on-campus modules for students. And what I would say is have a discussion with myself about what's going to work best for you if you're planning to apply. So if, for instance, if you're somebody maybe who can dedicate 1 or 2 days on campus, you might say, well, I'm going to choose options that will allow for maximum flexibility. So for instance, you can take the cultural history module as an asynchronous option. You can take that in your own time and then focus your available time for the on-campus engagement. But if you're somebody who really prefers on-campus experience, you can choose the modules that will have you on campus and in person the most. So I would say have a discussion with us in terms of what's going to work best for you in terms of that work balance. And I will say as well that there's absolutely wonderful online resources in the UL library to support flexible working for students. Okay, so if you are interested after all that, and I am coming to the end, I can see Erin keen to move on, are the first steps that you should take. As I said, it's ideal if you wish to continue to develop an individual course of research. So maybe you're interested in staying at UL, but your research interests aren't aligned with the specific trajectories of the other MA programs, then this is really one for you to consider. I would say make an appointment to discuss the program with myself. So applicants have found this really helpful. So any applicants, I tend to reach out to them. We have a quick 15 to 20 minute meeting online on Teams or on Zoom, and it just allows you to ask any questions relevant to your specific situation. And also maybe have a look at some of the modules in more detail, and you can also ask me any questions about those. So the kind of practicalities of fees and entry requirements, they're all on the GPS website, and I won't go through them there, but they're all available for you online. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to take them in the chat or at the Q&A session at the end of this session. So thank you so much for your attention. I'm going to stop sharing now and hand over to my colleague, Dr. Aaron Donaghy.
You're mute, Aaron.
Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, just a quick hello to everyone. It's great to see everyone here today, and we're obviously delighted that you've attended. So I'm Aaron Donaghy, and I'm co-directing the new MA in Global and Irish Conflict History. So my research expertise is in international history, mostly the 20th century. And I'm just going to say a few words today about the program, its content, and the overall objectives, what you'll be doing here. But also I'll be talking a bit about the subject matter, what we do when we study conflict history. And the aim of this program really is to equip you with advanced knowledge of Irish and global conflict history during the 20th century. And we're focusing on the 20th century for a couple of reasons, I suppose. First of all, we want to maximize the opportunity for you to engage with primary source material, to go to archives, to do archival research, but also because the 20th century was a particularly violent period in history. It was the most violent century on record. So about 187 million war-related deaths. And as you all know, this was an era marked by 2 world wars, a 40-year Cold War, which spanned conflicts all around the world, wars of national liberation, decolonization, state-sponsored mass murder in countries like the Soviet Union and China. And of course, we had instances of genocide that spanned the course of the century, from the Armenians to the Cambodians, to the Bosnians and Rwandans. So a very violent period in history. And as events in Ukraine are showing today, modern conflict has really global ramifications like refugee crises, food shortages, rising energy prices. And so for all these reasons, we felt it was important that we create an MA program that was solely devoted to the study of war and peace. So in other words, conflict and conflict resolution. And so by looking at conflict and its impact in society, we're in a better position to understand the world in which we live in, the world around us. And because conflict is such a vast subject, it's an enormous subject, we as historians approach it in all sorts of different and diverse ways. For example, some scholars focus on conflicts of material interest. So they'll focus on wars fought between states over things like territory or resources or new markets. Others will look at conflict from the bottom up, so social movements or protest movements about things like human rights, about social justice, civil liberties. And then other historians they approach a conflict from the point of view of identity. So things like gender, race, religion, nationality, ethnicity. And these are the kind of things I'm exploring in my current research project, which is a study of the Balkan Wars of the 1990s, the violent breakup of multi-ethnic, multicultural Yugoslavia. And then finally, as historians, we also study conflict resolution. In other words, the history of diplomacy, of negotiation between states. So we ask these key questions, what are the primary reasons for the outbreak of war? What can we learn from past failures or missed opportunities? For example, the lost chance for peace after World War I, or the failure to halt bloodshed in Vietnam, or more topically, the failure to build a relationship between the West and Russia during the 1990s after the Cold War. How and why does diplomacy succeed? So we could study case studies like the Cuban Missile Crisis or the successful rehabilitation of post-war Europe through things like NATO, through the European Economic Community, and the Marshall Plan. We can also study peace agreements like the Good Friday Accords that Ruan will be looking at, or the Camp David Accords, things like this. So these are the kind of things we're looking at. Political bargaining, compromise, mutual give and take that have long been central to conflict resolution. And one of the modules that I'll be teaching for the MA program will be on the Cold War. And in many ways, the Cold War incorporates all these different modes of analysis when we approach conflict. And the Cold War, as you probably know, shaped the world that we live in today. It was an ideological, political, military, strategic, economic, and cultural contest between the United States and the Allies on one hand, and the Soviet Union and its allies on the other. And this was a conflict that differed from conventional wars. So it spanned nearly half a century. It had no precise beginning or end dates, and there was no direct fighting, no direct conflict between the two superpowers. And so for this reason, scholars refer to the Cold War as the US-Soviet struggle as a Cold War. But if we delve more deeply at this period in history, we might ask the question, well, how cold was the Cold War? So yes, the world managed to escape the horrors of nuclear Armageddon, but more than 20 million people perished in wars fought between 1945 and 1990, and most of these were in developing nations. So while there's an uneasy peace hanging over Europe after 1945, there are proxy wars and colonial wars being waged all across the global south, in Asia, in Africa, and in Latin America. So the Cold War experience played out very differently in different parts of the world. And so for this MA, program, this module, will be looking very much at the global Cold War. In other words, we'll be looking at how the East-West conflict between America and the Soviets intersected with the North-South decolonization process. So we'll be looking at case studies like Afghanistan, Korea, Vietnam, and we'll be working with original archives during the Cold War from all around the world. And the Cold War is a good example of what I would call an ideological conflict. So many historians will cite the ideology as the main reason for its origins. So America's Empire of Liberty, for example, and the Soviets' Empire of Justice were fundamentally incompatible. So this was a showdown between democratic capitalism and authoritarian Marxism. And so to Americans, Soviet communism in many ways clashed with everything that they cherished. So people's democracy instead of liberal democracy, collective justice instead of individual rights, a command economy instead of free markets, communalism instead of private property, and atheism instead of religion. So Americans, for example, saw more parallels than differences between Nazism and communism, one form of totalitarianism replacing another. The Cold War is also notable for the way it ended. So when we think of wars of conflicts, most of them result in very bloody outcomes, okay? The two world wars, Vietnam, Iraq, Yugoslavia, but the Cold War ended largely peacefully. And its sudden demise in the late 80s and early 90s really defied the predictions of all scholars and diplomats who had suggested that it could not end peacefully, because great powers seldom fall without putting up a fight. But that is essentially what happens at the end of the Cold War. So shortly after the Soviet Union willingly relinquished control over its empire in Eastern Europe, the USSR collapses. And this, as you know, had profound consequences. So America emerges as the world's undisputed power. Democracy, capitalism, free markets, globalization, all accelerate around the world. And the fear of nuclear war, at least until very recently, diminished. But now, though, with the Russian war in Ukraine and with the rising tensions today between Washington and Beijing, scholars are talking about a new Cold War or a second Cold War. So this module is very much designed to provide some context for the breakdown in relations between Washington and Moscow and Beijing during the 1990s and 2000s. In other words, to provide some context for the situation today. And one of the features of being an historian is that we engage with original archival material. So primary sources, things like government documents, head of state correspondence, policy memos, transcripts of summit meetings, private papers, and so on. And so one of the key aims of this MA program is to introduce you to the wealth of archives that are available to research, whether that's in Ireland or overseas or online. So for example, I recently wrote a book in the Cold War of the 1980s, and I visited the Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan presidential libraries. I went to various universities, their archival collections in the United States. I went to the UK National Archives in London, but I also used newly declassified archives from around the world that are now available for you to examine online. Unfortunately, many of these are being translated into English, so they're readily accessible for you to use. So as MA students, you'll have the opportunity to go to the archives, study these original documents, and then, as Niamh was alluding to, work on a research project of your own choice. And you'll learn how to use these archival findings to construct your own arguments and interpretations about a particular conflict, event, process, and so on. And you'll write a short dissertation, about 15,000 words, under the expert guidance of a supervisor here at the History Department. I should say that my co-director for this MA program is Ruan O'Donnell, who unfortunately can't be here today as he's teaching, but he will be he'll be teaching on the Irish conflict component of this program. And he'll be leading, as mentioned before, a course called The Long War in Ireland. And this module will explore the conflict in Northern Ireland from the 1960s through to the 1990s and the signing of the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. So for those of you who are unaware, the Troubles in Northern Ireland saw the longest and most serious insurgency in Western Europe after World War II. And this module will explore the perspectives not only of the Irish, but also of the British and American governments too. So we'll be looking in this course at archives from all three parties involved in that process. Finally, as well, the MA program will include a 2 or 3 day field trip to key sites of conflict here in Ireland. I know that Ruan will be organising this, and I know that he's penciled in some visits to museums, to murals, to war memorials, and also guided tours at various historical locations across Dublin, Belfast, and Derry. And the purpose really of this is to provide you with sort of on-site experiential experience, an experiential dimension to the program through visiting these different sites of conflict. So you'll get a sort of an on-site feel for what these things feel like. If you've got any questions about the Irish history component, please do reach out to Ruan. And like I say, if there's anything on the international side, you can reach out to myself, Aaron Donaghy. So again, many thanks for being here. I'm very happy to take any questions about the MA Conflict History program that you may have. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Aaron, and thanks, Niamh. And you just got a sample there of what it might be like in Aaron's Cold War module. And just to back up what Niamh and Aaron was talking about, this experiential learning, this is something almost unique to UL. It's not available in many other places. This idea of field trips and the idea of in the MA history, the public history internship, that sets our programs apart and will allow you to acquire particular types of skills when you're hands-on almost with archival material or legacy materials, as in the case of the field trip to the north of Ireland and to Dublin. So now is an opportunity to ask particular questions. You can place them put them into the chat. You can also, I'm not sure whether you can actually speak, or I don't know whether the webinar, maybe Una can advise us.
It's just chat, David. So
it's just chat.
Yeah, yes. But they can type their questions into the chat there. I see someone typing there. Dan is typing there. So we'll give him a moment.
We can give people a moment to compose a question. And remember also that you can directly email Niamh or Aaron or anybody else. I see Dan has a question. Well, he's got some books on his shelf, but probably like most of us, our working books are at home, where we spend most of the time. Niamh has a lovely collection of books, I have to say. Shama is coming, says hello Shama, you're very welcome. And Una has provided some additional contacts there for Aaron and Ruan. So, I mean, if we don't have any particular questions, people may want to go directly to the course directors for further information, or go onto the website, the GPS website. Shampa is asking, I would like to know more about hands-on or internship opportunities, like you said. So I'll pass that to Niamh, who can take the public history internship one. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks, Shampa, and thanks for being here. So essentially, the internship is an opportunity where you go to work with one of our partner institutions. So I suppose as historians, we would work very closely with a whole range of institutions, whether that's archives, whether it's like the arts office, the cultural heritage officers, whether it's libraries, museums, sites of historic interest. So there's a whole range of institutions that are continually involved in, I suppose, the work of history. And we have those on a nationwide basis that we would work with. And we've also engaged in establishing internships for people, if it suits the individual student, internationally as well. And essentially what we do is, we make sure that there are key learning outcomes that are established, what you hope to achieve through your engagement with that internship and what you want to experience. And then we'll pair you with the appropriate host. So that can depend on a whole range of factors. It might include, what's local to you, what's suitable for you in terms of where you're staying or where you're based, your particular research interests, and what that, whether you're interested in being maybe public facing, or whether you're more interested in maybe archiving or cataloging or working with historic materials or curatorial work or whatever it is. So, it really always begins with a conversation with the student, and then we think about the best internship host for that individual person. And then we make sure that there's an established course of learning that takes place in the process of the internship, so that you're continually reflecting and engaging in that process of learning while you're there. But I know that our students who undertake the internship module really, really value it. I know myself that it's, there's nothing like, putting your skills into practice, whether, it's suddenly having to write, 25 exhibition catalogue entries, or, design maybe a educational component for second level schools for a local history library exhibition or whatever it is, and suddenly thinking, okay, how do I actually put my excellent research skills into practice in terms of this task that I've now been given, in terms of maybe communicating this history to a public and or to different publics. So, it's really varied, and I would say it really begins with that conversation. And I would say that that's something that UL is very good at, which is about really thinking, kind of working individually with students and what they need and what they want, and making sure that the course of learning that they engage in really responds to what they hope to do, and giving them as good a platform as we can in terms of the next steps for your career, whatever that is going to look like for you. So there we are. So I think, am I answering the question?
Yeah, I think you are. Niamh. It's besides all the skills that you get from doing the public history internship, when you graduate and you're applying for jobs or you're going on to do further things, you not only have the MA and the actual formal learning, but you can actually talk about the experience and the work experience that you will have received as part of that. Dan is back, and he is interested in Ruan's and Aaron's. This is the MA in Global and Irish Conflict History. And he has a worry. He has a huge interest in history and politics, but doesn't have a formal education or degree in history. Would this be an impediment to doing an MA, or would it be better to do an introductory year at another level? Well, it's not. It's typically you would have a degree in history or some other type of related experience. So the university has something called a recognised prior learning policy, where if you've done other work in the general area of history, or you can demonstrate that you have knowledge of this particular area, then that could work in terms of applying for this course. But I would encourage you to email Aaron or email Ruan to test out that, to see what can be done. It's not entirely an impediment, if I may jump in there. I see Niamh is answering some of the questions that are coming through there, and Una has said, if you would like to book a one-to-one consultation to learn more about the application process at UL, you can book a slot here by clicking on that link. And I know Una will be happy to talk to you, as well as any of the course directors as well. That's great, Dan, and thank you very much. Yes, Shampa has one more question. So I already did Masters in History, but I'm passionate about learning more about medieval and ancient history. Niamh.
Shampa, you're giving us wonderful material to advocate for getting some new staff members in medieval and ancient history. Unfortunately, we're really a department that kind of kicks off from the early modern period. So we don't offer modules in medieval or ancient history. I will say, though, that I know my own research focuses quite a lot on medievalism in the 19th century. So the kind of interest in medieval culture that characterizes so much of architecture and art and fashion even, and literature and different kinds of cultural expression in the 19th century. So I can help you with medievalism, and certainly we could think about, we have an incredible medieval collection in the Hunt Museum, which I've recommended to you in the chat. So if you were interested in perhaps engaging with some of the collection there through the public history internship, that might be a way of building some medieval material into your work. But sadly, as of now, David, I think we don't offer.
No, we don't. But like, I would love to, as Niamh was implying there. And don't forget, we have that 3-credit module in medieval Latin, which could be a starting point for further. And we also have this wonderful collection in our library, the Bolton Library, which has some medieval texts as well. And I've seen whole MA dissertations based around a single text, so it's not impossible. So perhaps, Shampa, you'd like to talk to Niamh separately on a one-to-one to flesh out some of the possibilities there that she was mentioning. If there are no other questions, I think we'll draw proceedings to a close. I want to thank you very much for attending. I hope you've got something out of it. Hopefully this is the starting point for you. I wish you well in whatever you do. I look forward, though, to meeting you, as do all my colleagues, when you decide to do any one of our MAs. Tara O'Brien, who is a graduate in the MA History of the Family, who's happily, and I don't think she has been bribed, or says I can recommend it. It was excellent, but I'm interested in progressing. I realize the focus is on taught MA programs here, but perhaps one of the contributors might talk about the process of applying for PhD programs. Yes, indeed, and we should have said that our MAs are a stepping stone for the next stage, which is the PhD, which is full-on research at PhD level. Many of our graduates have gone on to do PhDs. Those skills, particularly around the dissertation and working with a supervisor, is the first introduction in a way to PhD study. What I would recommend, Tara, is you look through our staff profiles, see if there's something there. No doubt you have an interest, no doubt you have a question, an area, a place, a time that you're interested in exploring. Have a look through our profiles. You've probably met many people already that on the program that you know about, and make contact with a potential supervisor. That's the very first step, making contact and discussing with them your ideas. And with them, you will be able to see what the possibilities are and to put an application together and a research proposal. That is the step for joining the PhD register. So I wish you luck on that. And of course, we'd be very happy to advise and to help along the way. Okay, that looks good. Lots of positive signs there in the chat. Again, thank you for coming. Thank you to my colleagues, and thank you to Una for organising this. We're delighted really with the attendance. And as I said, I wish you all very well in your further studies. We'll leave it there.
Thanks all. Thank you.
Thanks everyone, and just get in touch if you have any questions. Thanks everyone.